why we're turning to our Chief Meteorologist, Steve Jervey, with the latest. Steve.
Yep, Keith, just doing some analysis on our maximum wind speeds, looking where the center of the system is, where the stronger hurricane winds could be located. But of course, Max Defender 8 is where we always want to start, because that gives us an idea where the local showers and storms are. Unfortunately, things are relatively quiet, but local effects already being that they've closed the Skyway Bridge, and Florida Highway Patrol makes that decision when they're seeing wind gusts at 40 miles per hour. So that's closed at the moment, and I assume it'll be for the duration of the event. But right now, most of the heavier rain is farther down to the south. You see West Palm Beach, Delray Beach, and you see little flashes here. And even one near Fort Pierce. These are tornado warnings. And you see the banding features, 1, 2, like that. When you see hurricanes, especially strong hurricanes that move into an area, you'll see them kick off these rain bands that'll kind of roll off the center, and then they'll travel sometimes 100 miles plus off the center of that, and then you'll see a lot of shear within that, and that will create some tornadoes within that line, and that's what we're seeing here today. That's around Vero Beach, which is in Indian River County over on the east coast, just south there, it looks like, down to Fort Pierce. That's outside of Indian River County, but you can see how fast everything's moving, and that tends to create a lot of wind shear coming off the Gulf, very strong wind gusts as well, and they'll see that up the east coast. Although the focus has shifted more west to the west coast of Florida, they're still seeing some very strong wind gusts here in this region, and how the flow is controlled by a storm that is basically centered on the northern part of the island of Cuba and all the way up across the state of Florida. The flow is controlled that way. You could just see it rolling around the center of it. So there's a closer look at that tornado warning in Fort Pierce, and as I mentioned, tomorrow, as these bands start to move north, there's Northport and Sebring and Sarasota, as these start to move north, we'll definitely start to see bands like this across our area, and within these bands, even some lightning strikes you can see passing through here very briefly. We'll start to see probably some tornadoes pop up as well, and tornado warnings issued, but that's more likely tomorrow as we start to see this push farther to the north. And possibly we'll see a tornado watch issued by the Storm Prediction Center. Julie, you got a little bit on that. First of all, you want to talk about the 8 p.m. update?
Sure, yeah, we do have the 8 p.m. update. So we'll show you this is actually tapping into the Key West Doppler radar. And you can see we've been watching this eye, and for us, it's hard to really note too much of a northwesterly track. But at the 8 p.m. update, they did say it was moving to the west-northwest, but it's definitely slowing down. They said at only 7 miles per hour. But this is a nice view to take a look at those rain bands. And here's the 8 p.m. advisory. Moving to the west-northwest, 7 miles per hour. Now, it's been interacting with Cuba for a while now, and it has weakened 5 miles per hour. So max winds of 120 miles per hour, minimum pressure 932 millibars as of this update. And you can see that eye here on the satellite imagery, still very well defined and kind of skirting the west or the northern coast of Cuba, you can see, but not moving very quickly right now. So still slow, and it's really been slow to make any sort of northerly jog. So we're still waiting for that to happen. And as Steve and I and Ian have been talking about for the last hour or two, we have noticed in some recent models more of a westerly shift. So here's that 8 p.m. track update. Well, the track isn't updated at this point. It's still the same cone, just mainly the position and the maximum wind speeds. But we'll get a new track update and also a new cone at 11 p.m. So we've still got, this is potentially a Category 4 storm moving near the southwest coast of Florida as we head into Sunday afternoon into Sunday evening. And then as it's moving to the northern portions of the Tampa Bay area, potentially a Category 3 with winds at 115 miles per hour and then moving out. So we'll have to see when they update the track and also the cone at 11 p.m. if they do notice any more of a westerly jog. It seems like each update that comes out, Steve, right? We do keep saying it's moved, the track has shifted a little bit farther west, and that's been a common trend.
Just knock it back a couple of frames. I want to see that the center of the storm. A good way to track the storm, and in fact the Hurricane Center does this too, once it's in range, I mean it's 1,000, 2,000 miles away, they can watch it with Hurricane Hunter aircraft, but when it's close enough to use the Key West Doppler radar, that's the best way to measure it. So we were watching that. Let's get real tight on that and see, can we detect any kind of a northwesterly turn there?
Based off of the eye, a little bit, but it's slight.
It's definitely west-northwest. I think they said 290 degrees, which is just north of west with 275, so 290 degrees. So we're looking for some kind of influence from that strong ridge, apparently, which is much stronger than anticipated. That is actually finally turning to the north, as a lot of the computer models have suggested. So we're basically looking for that and just trying to eyeball it and look at the center of the storm and see if it's turning north yet.
Right, and I think based off of the direction we're seeing this and a couple of models we looked at, I think the trend is definitely that the 11 p.m. update, we may see that shift a little bit even farther west.
Right, and that's what some of the computer models have suggested. We've been talking about how that's not really our favorite idea because that does put us in greater effects for wind, especially around the stronger advancing side on the eastern side of the eye, but also increases the effect of water effects, storm surge, etc. But as I was saying to Julie, this isn't a storm like we had in 1848 or 1921 when it came in directly from the west. That's likely going to cause a greater storm surge, especially if it's a big geographical storm. That would create a greater storm surge, pushing it right into Tampa Bay as the storm came in, like in Tarpon Springs in 1921. We had a storm like that that caused immense surge. But we will likely see storm surge on the backside of this storm on the west and southern side once the storm passes to the north. And that's true for everybody up and down the west coast of Florida, from Sarasota to Manatee County into Pinellas County, and then eventually the northern counties, Citrus, Hernando, Pasco, and then within the bay itself. That's why we've been showing that high tide graphic, which is roughly around, say, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning on Monday morning. That's when the greatest concern for storm surge will be.
And we've been really trying to look at closely, especially as the track, keeps shifting a little bit. At this point, it's mainly been shifting west of any increase in surge in places, and trying to keep a very close eye on that. And so are your, your emergency officials, because they're the ones that issue those evacuation orders for different zones. So we're keeping a close eye on the different levels of surge we could see in different counties. Right now we're kind of thinking 4 to 8 feet in places like, Tampa Bay and up through Pinellas, but that is subject to change depending on the exact motion and the direction of the storms as they approach the coastline.
Right, we're trying to get a solid track, and as time gets closer to landfall, we'll get a better, clearer idea as to where that track will go. Let's get back to our graphics here and move along and talk about some of the things. That 8 p.m. update is down from 125 to 120. Hey, looking for anything encouraging at this point, so just tell us the storm may be just a little bit weaker. I like that trend. But as you can see, the lines of showers, and we talked about the tornado watch course farther down to the south, and showers like this that likely could occur across the area as they move across the region tomorrow. So there's a look at Irma. Again, the numbers, as Julie was showing you, a large storm, and the center too, looking for some kind of northwesterly jog. Maybe that looks a little bit better on satellite, but well, we'll see if that trend continues on. It has wobbled. If you look at the track it's been on, it's been kind of wobbly right along that northern coast over the last 24 hours.
And again, if you missed the Conan track just a minute ago, here it is for you again. Again, this isn't updated at 8 p.m. They wait to update this until 11 p.m., putting in all the latest data and numbers from all of the hurricane hunters that are out gathering data within these storms and looking at the latest models. And you can see, so at this point, still potentially a Category 4, approaching or possibly making landfall along the southwest coast, and then really kind of moving through the heart of the Tampa Bay area as a major hurricane. So again, of course, those hurricane force gusts expected by tomorrow evening. So have your preparations done today. And then quickly weakening, though, with the interaction with land expected to quickly weaken as we head into the southeast, and then, kind of push out into the southeast there.
But in the range of a Category 3 or 4 hurricane, we're talking about over 100-mile-per-hour winds possible. And I want you to prepare yourself for that possibility. Should it continue on that track, should it continue that same intensity, that we could be looking at those kinds of winds across the region. They can be very destructive, and ideally you have made good plans if you haven't had to evacuate. That's you're taking cover inside an interior room and to ride out the storm. The idea is to keep the wind out of your home. That would be protect the windows and the doors, the garage door, things like that, entry points for wind. That is the survival tip for being in high winds in storms. And it's a tough thing to talk about, but looking at the current forecast track, a 3 or a 4 hurricane passing over the area, we have to kind of open our minds to that and realize we could see those kinds of winds.
Because so many people are new to the Tampa Bay area. They have not experienced something like this ever. So it's going to be Sunday night where you're going to be hearing those winds howling, and a lot of the area has never heard wind gusts over 100 miles per hour.
And I should mention too, I actually wasn't in the 1921 storm, even though I was old. I just had good with history there. So all right, let's move on. You talk about the storm surge warning, and that's of course what we were talking about, that surge. That's up and down the coast, and starting first with Sarasota County and then moving north.
And again, this is you run from the water, hide from the wind. So that's why they've issued those evacuation orders for potentially some of your areas, to make sure you listen to the emergency officials. They've issued those for a reason. Flood watch, though, for the entire Tampa Bay area. It looks like now most of the Tampa Bay area is probably going to be in the eastern side of the storm, the wetter side. So easily 10 to 12, maybe 14 inches of rain in spots is not out of the question for us at this point.
It sounds good. And finally,
we'll take a look at the rainfall forecast.
Right. Tell us about that, Julie.
And you can see, you know, those rainfall amounts. This is by Monday at 8 a.m. This is just one of the models we're looking at. And of course, this is a model, this is a forecast, you know, not set in stone. But you can see bright red, 4 to 6 inches of rain through Monday at 8 a.m. As you head more into the purples, this is more than 8 inches of rain. So places like, you know, Polk County, Highlands County, DeSoto County, this is probably where we'll see the highest rainfall totals. As you head a little bit closer towards the coast, they may be a little bit lower, but, you know, we can still, if you're picking up 4, 6, 7, 8 inches of rain, you can still see some flooding, of course, in your streets, in your neighborhoods from the rain.
Yeah, and a lot of this will come on the northern side of it. We're seeing, like South Florida, where you went to school down in Miami, you're seeing some very heavy rain come across there. And sometimes you get that training effect like we see in the summertime here and pick up, you know, 7, 8 inches of rain just on a summer afternoon if you get some kind of weird training effect where the showers are moving over the same area time after time. So that's kind of what those rain bands do, so you can pick up a lot of rain even before the actual heart of the storm gets here. And
thankfully that's something, you know, if you live in the Tampa Bay area for even just the past couple of years, we have had some flooding events where we've seen some of the heavier rain, but I think what will be the new thing is the, you know, those very intense winds as the storm rolls through will be something that I don't think many people here have experienced unless you've been through a Charlie or an Andrew like you have.
Winds, rain, and then storm surge. Winds, rain, storm surge. That's what we're thinking primarily about, and as we get more information on the storm, we make a better forecast, we give you a better idea of what you can expect at your house, what kind of wind gusts, and of course the very heavy rain. Storm teammates Even Oliver is back. You know, he was the road warrior. He was down in South Florida, down in Miami Beach, expecting the storm to come in, but as we've seen that track shift, Ian came back, and now he's joining us here in the office and looking at some of the data and some of the forecast maximum wind speeds for the area so people can kind of get an idea what to expect. Ian's right behind me here. Sorry, I introduced you and there you were. Okay.
Good evening.
Welcome back,
to Miles.
Yeah. So this is it. This is our tropical storm force we have in yellow and hurricane being red, right?
Yeah, this is the actual product coming from the National Hurricane Center, fading on the winds here. What you're seeing in yellow is tropical storm force winds. So just trying to give people a bit of a timeline here as far as the progression of the storm. The red, of course, is hurricane force winds.
Yeah, and on the stronger winds, as we talk about the advancing side of the storm.
Quadrant. Right there. That's where we see the most violent winds typically as we're adding the storm motion to the actual wind speeds from the storm. So first thing tomorrow morning, hopefully nobody's on the Keys at this point, to be honest. But if you're waking up in the Keys tomorrow morning, you're waking up to a very rough start to the day with a major hurricane right on top of the Keys. You notice, though, south of I-4 tomorrow morning, that's where we're starting to see some of those tropical storm force winds. And then as we move on through the day tomorrow, the entire area seeing at least tropical storm force winds. Red shading starting to creep up into Sarasota, also into DeSoto counties, far southeastern parts of Manatee County. This is 5 o'clock, the timestamp, late tomorrow afternoon into the evening hours. And we've been talking about a long night tomorrow night, Sunday, into the early part of Monday. Here is why. That red shading covering most of the Tampa Bay area, right on top of Pinellas, Hillsborough, western parts of Polk, much of the Nature Coast counties. Then by 7 a.m., bulk of the hurricane force winds sliding off to the north. But even by that's 9 o'clock Monday.
And these, what you're looking at, these lines, these are lines of equal pressure or isobars, and they indicate the southern flow around the part of the storm. So when you see this line coming like this, basically coming in from the west and southwest, that's what that line of equal pressure is actually doing. So when we showed you the individual lines around the center of it, lower pressure at the center, and then as you go out from it, higher pressure. And basically wind comes from the push and the pull between high and low pressure. That's what creates wind and pressure systems around the globe. High levels, mid levels, and the surface levels. In this case, we're talking about surface levels. But when you see these isobars, it can be a little bit confusing, I think, at times to say, well, what are these lines? Well, that's the onshore flow in northern counties. So as Ian was saying, Monday at 9 p.m., that's the kind of timing on that. So see what other kind of graphics. He's gone to look for a microphone, I think. All right, so here's a look at 120 mile per hour winds to review. This is as of 8 o'clock. Track didn't change as of 8, but it did change the position, and the winds are down a little bit. Been interacting with Cuba all day. Remember a couple of days ago, just they were talking about 155 mile per hour winds here, and then they forecast 155 mile per hour winds here, which kind of surprised me because I knew the storm was going to be interacting with land, but it didn't turn out that way because of the land interaction, and there are some very high spots on Cuba, and we've seen some video out of Cuba. It's not They've seen quite a bit of damage there as a result, and we feel for the folks down there. But we're looking for the northwesterly turn here on satellite. We don't really quite clearly see it yet at this point. 932 millibars pressure. The lower the pressure, the more intense the storm. I think the pressure has actually come up a little bit. Hurricane warnings obviously in place. If you're here hiding from the storm, from the Keys, or if you're from Key West, the storm is likely going to pass very close to Key West. We're seeing some of the upper Keys. They're seeing the strong winds. They're seeing the higher seas, and that will continue. There'll probably be a pretty decent little surge, too, into more shallow areas of South Florida, maybe even all the way up into Biscayne Bay, but nowhere near where they perhaps had previously thought. The storm surges on the East Coast aren't as great because the water's just deeper. They can tend to mix down a little bit deeper, but in places like Biscayne Bay, where the water's just a little more shallow, then you don't see, then the surge is going to be just a little bit more than that. So that's Sunday at 2 p.m., 140-mile-per-hour winds. Monday at 2 a.m. with 115-mile-per-hour winds. And this puts the forecast track. Let's get in a little tighter here, Phil. You can see between Category 4 and Category 3 and the timing here, that gives you a rough idea where that passage would be. So essentially right over the city of Tampa is what this current forecast. And what we're looking for, we've been talking about whether or not this could shift a little to the west with some of what the computer models are suggesting. I think one of the last hits we showed you, the H-Wharf model was kind of like shifting a little farther to the west. So we're interested to see at 11 p.m. whether or not they'll take that in and then actually factor that into the forecast. So that's Monday at 2 a.m. Counterclockwise rotation. Southern areas are starting to see this storm surge at that time period, and still some very strong wind gusts here moving to the north. But as the day goes along on Monday, conditions will improve except for storm surge conditions, and they'll actually get worse probably as the day goes along, because those winds closer to the center of potentially a Category 3 just north of downtown Tampa, and Category 3 goes up to 115-mile-per-hour winds. I think I'll get a little chart to be sure, but it sure gives you the idea that there's some very strong winds that are still possible. And when you see a Category 3, yes, that doesn't mean you're going to have sustained winds for an hour of 115 miles per hour. You probably see winds going down to 80, 90 miles per hour, then maybe gust up to 110 miles per hour or 115 miles per hour. That's been my experience in hurricanes anyway, but it can be anything over 100 miles per hour can be quite terrifying and do a lot of damage. So the bottom line here, main impacts from Irma expected Sunday afternoon through Monday locally. That'll work its way from south to north. We're talking about South Florida and then working its way north. So Sunday afternoon to Monday, we just talked about the timing on that. 75 to 100-mile-per-hour winds with higher gusts. We're kind of estimating conservative right now, okay? We know that winds could go a little higher than that, but note this, higher gusts. And as we get a clearer picture as to what we can actually expect from the storm, the path, and the intensity, we'll try to zero in a little bit more locally as to what we can expect with those winds. But right now, I want you to plan on that. And then the rainfall, 6 to 12 inches. We talked about the flood advisories in place. The highest surge will be south of the bay, 4 to 8 feet in some spots, because the storm will probably have more intensity on the southern side as the storm moves north. For example, if in this example, the storm's over Tampa itself, the city of Tampa, farther south, with those winds coming around the southern side into Manatee, Sarasota, and eventually even Tampa Bay, we'll see probably the greatest surge for that area. So as we talk about total rain, I think Julie looked at another computer model, and we look at many different computer models as to what we could possibly expect. This is a different one. Sunday, 11 p.m., possible 10 inches of rain, Bartow, Tampa, as you can see running through this time frame, Monday, 11 a.m. That's what this computer model is saying. This is the RPM, Julie? I think that's what that is.
I think so.
Yeah, so that just gives you the idea of what we can expect here. So the hurricane force winds, I think we were talking about that, moving from south to north, again, throughout the region. Kind of like to get back into that local graphic, Julie, if we had those local effects graphics.
Yes.
The reason we do, because a lot of folks just ask us, okay, that's nice, but what's it like at my house? I live in Sebring, I live in Inverness, I live in Sarasota. What's it like at my house? We try to localize the effects a little bit more, and I think as time gets closer to the event, we'll probably give you a little bit better idea what you can expect closer to where you live. But generally, Highlands, Hardee County, DeSoto County, and DeSoto County actually in the southern portion actually has some water that is susceptible to surge coming up from the south, so that's a concern there. Okay, high winds 70 to 90 miles per hour, again on the conservative side with higher gusts, possibly close to or over 100 miles per hour. A little farther out, though, from the center of the storm, especially if it keeps moving west. Rainfall, 10 to 14 inches of rain, not expecting a surge, except for that little area in DeSoto County. And then tornadoes, kind of like we just showed you, across the southern part of the state. For Pinellas County, 75 to 100 mile per hour with higher gusts, 8 to 12 inches of rain, isolated in bands for tornadoes. Tidal and coastal flooding we talked about on the southern side of the storm. Manatee, Sarasota, storm surge there, probably some of the greater, and then including in Tampa Bay itself. Tornadoes, low risk there, moderate for rainfall, but winds, especially because they'll be closer to the more intense part of the hurricane as it moves from south to north. Hillsborough County, 75 to 100 mile per hour winds. Could be stronger than that, we know that. Could be some higher gusts as we get a better fix in strength on the storm. Rainfall, 8 to 12 inches of rain, of course, and then the bay flooding. We talked about the flooding into the bay. Watch your high tides, especially Monday. And then for Polk County, 65 to 95 miles per hour. Could be some higher gusts, especially as that storm enters, and that what Ian was saying about that northeast quadrant. Isolated tornado possible there. And then Pasco, Hernando, Citrus, northern counties. That surge will come a little bit later as that low pressure area, the hurricane, will move farther to the north. But definitely coastal tidal flooding, watching the high tides there, especially on Monday, later on Monday, and then winds of 70 to 90 miles per hour, as factoring in the possibility that the storm could weaken just a little bit and be less intense in Citrus, Hernando, and Pasco County. So there you go, guys, just a little rundown. We'll continue to show you different graphics of what you can expect and show you the radar, Max Defender 8 as well, kind of keep you up to date. Trying to track that eye using that Key West Doppler radar is very helpful. I don't know, did you see a northwest turn there? I didn't quite see it yet.
Very little. Very little. No, I'm glad you mentioned Max Defender 8, though. That is a free download on your cell phone. You can get the News Channel 8 app, and actually you guys talk to us in the middle of the night when something is close, so it'll actually wake you up and let you know.
Turn your notifications on when you get the Weather Max app. It is a very valuable resource.